They were the couple who lit up America's living rooms in the 1960s, two stars whose chemistry on Bewitched cast a spell on millions. To viewers, they were the perfect pair, enchanting, hilarious, and effortlessly in sync. But behind the glow of studio lights, Elizabeth Montgomery carried a truth about Dick York that she kept hidden for decades, a truth that would forever change the way fans saw them. On screen, their smiles looked easy. Off-screen, there were whispers. Glances that lingered a little too long. Conversations that drifted from playful to personal. Moments so charged, they blurred the line between acting and something deeper. York and Montgomery never openly acknowledged what was happening, but those closest to them felt it every day. Years later, Elizabeth would reveal what she had kept tucked away all that time. Revelation that shattered the illusion of the flawless sitcom marriage fans adored. And once you know what truly unfolded between them, Bewitched will never look the same. From the moment Dick York walked onto the set as Darren Stevens, something shifted. The audience saw a witty, loving husband to Samantha. But York, he saw more than just a co-star. Crew members spoke about the way his eyes softened when she entered the room, how his smile stretched just a bit wider, how his voice changed gentler, warmer whenever she stood near him between takes. He always seemed to drift toward her, finding excuses to talk, to linger. Rumors began to swirl that his feelings weren't just friendly. They were deeper, softer, more vulnerable than anyone expected. Elizabeth tried to brush it off. She was no stranger to admiration, especially in the male-dominated world of 1960s television. But this wasn't the usual flirtation. Dick York's infatuation grew with every episode, and soon the tension became impossible to ignore. He never behaved inappropriately, but the weight of his unspoken affection hung in the air, affecting every scene they shared. People on set began noticing her reactions. A smile that tightened just slightly. A small, subtle step backward. A shift in posture that only someone paying close attention would catch. She prided herself on being professional, and maintaining that composure became harder with every passing week. Yet to the millions watching at home, their marriage was TV perfection. They saw chemistry. Elizabeth felt pressure. Not from anything he said, but from everything he didn't yet still quietly revealed. His emotions were silent but unmistakable, and they shaped their performance in ways even fans couldn't identify. York wasn't just acting. He was channeling something real, and Elizabeth had to carefully maneuver around it as the seasons went on. The unspoken connection deepened, becoming a current neither of them addressed, but both lived within. What they didn't know was that this tension would plant the seed of a much larger story, one that would resurface decades later. Long after the show wrapped and the magic faded from television, screens, and that story would soon collide with a chapter of York's life more painful than anyone on set could have imagined, a chapter that began years earlier. During the filming of They Came to Cordelia in 1959, in a single brutal moment on set, while filming a scene that demanded he lift and carry heavy railroad ties, Dick York felt a sudden, sharp, tearing pain shoot through his back. What at first seemed like a simple pulled muscle would reveal itself as a permanent, life-altering spinal injury. He pushed on, as actors often must, ignoring the pain because Hollywood schedules allowed no room for rest. But the damage was done. By the time he stepped into the role of Darren Stevens in 1964, the injury had become a constant. Invisible shadow, long days, endless retakes, and the relentless demand to appear cheerful and energetic turned every moment into a battle. Painkillers became his silent companion, the only way to endure the punishing production schedule. Yet the side effects, fatigue, mood swings, and mental fog began to seep into his work. Elizabeth Montgomery noticed. She caught the subtle wincing, the shifting in his seat to ease the pressure on his back, and in private, she confided to crew members her concern over how much pain he was hiding. But York, proud and perhaps silently motivated by his feelings for her, never asked for special treatment. Every scene with Elizabeth was worth the torment, even if it pushed his body past its breaking point. As time went on, the injury became more than physical. York began experiencing hallucinations during the worst flare-ups. He once told a friend he could hear bagpipes playing non-stop when the pain was at its peak. Those around him were unnerved, but he smiled through it, masking the cracks that were widening in both body and mind. Keeping up the flawless image of Darren Stevens became increasingly impossible, and the slow decline was silently setting the stage for a shocking, abrupt departure from Bewitched. Then it happened without warning. One day, York was on set, trading playful banter with Elizabeth between takes. The next, he was gone. There was no farewell episode, no public announcement, just a sudden replacement. To viewers, the switch to a new Darren felt jarring, abrupt, but behind the cameras, the truth was far more painful. York's back injury had finally reached its breaking point. Painkillers and willpower were no longer enough. During the 1969 filming of the Season 5 episode Daddy Does His Thing, he collapsed on set. Crew members rushed to his side as he lay helpless on the floor, unable to move. It was more than a flare-up hit, was his body demanding surrender. He was taken away and never returned. There were no fanfare, no public statements, and in that era, the network quietly erased him from scripts, bringing in Dick Sargent as if nothing had happened. For Elizabeth, the change was devastating in ways the audience never saw. Professionally, she had to keep the show running, adapt to a new on-screen husband, and maintain the illusion that everything was fine. Personally, she felt the absence of a co-star who had been a partner for 5 intense formative years. The gap left by York was both tangible and haunting, a loss that extended far beyond the cameras. Behind the laughter and magic of the show, Elizabeth Montgomery had lost someone who had been part of her daily life, someone whose presence had carried an undercurrent of unspoken feelings. Fans speculated endlessly about why Dick York had vanished from Bewitched. Some blamed conflicts with producers, others whispered about substance issues. Few realized the true depth of his suffering, the silent battles he fought every day. York rarely spoke of it, quietly stepping out of the spotlight. But his story didn't end with his departure. Once removed from Hollywood's glare, his life quickly spiraled. The actor who had once entered millions of homes weekly found himself confined to his own, grappling with relentless pain and a body that refused to heal. Acting opportunities dried up almost overnight. Producers were unwilling to hire someone who couldn't guarantee he could survive a long shoot. Offers that did come were either physically impossible or so far beneath his previous stature that accepting them felt like defeat. His hidden injury had grown into a relentless adversary. Days were measured by stretches of bed rest, each movement a reminder of what he had lost. Painkillers numbed the agony, but also dulled his energy, trapping him in an exhausting cycle of dependency. Financial troubles followed. Residuals from Bewitched weren't enough to keep him afloat, and over time friends drifted away. Hollywood celebrates its stars but forgets them just as fast once the cameras stop rolling. Yet, York's resilience surfaced in small, quiet ways. He took on voiceover work from home when he could, lending his warm, familiar voice to commercials and small projects. He began writing, filling pages with memories, reflections, and the pain of losing his career. These writings would later become his autobiography, chronicling hallucinations, suffering, and the devastation of a life altered forever. Throughout it all, whispers of Elizabeth Montgomery lingered. Some claimed she reached out privately, offering support. Others insisted she never intervened, focused entirely on her own career. The truth remained murky, feeding decades of speculation. As the 1980s drew to a close, York's name resurfaced in a way no one expected, and Elizabeth's memory was drawn back into the narrative. Stories emerged, first as whispers in fan circles, claiming she had visited him in his final years. According to these tales, she appeared at his modest Michigan home for a quiet, emotional reunion, confessing she had never forgotten him. They supposedly parted with tears in their eyes, a touching image that captured the imagination of fans everywhere. The story spread through nostalgia magazines, online forums, and social media posts. Some claimed first-hand knowledge, but no proof ever surfaced, no photos, no credible accounts, only vague, shifting recollections. Friends close to York insist the visit never happened. In his final years, his world was tightly controlled by declining health and immobility, leaving little room for such a reunion. The legend endured because the bond between Elizabeth and Dick, real or imagined, had captivated audiences for decades. Even absent proof, fans clung to the notion that the connection that had sparked behind the camera on Bewitched had never fully vanished, lingering quietly until the very end. Visitors were rare, and Dick York spent most of his time either in bed or in a chair by the window. Those who knew Elizabeth insist she never made the trip, noting she never mentioned such a visit in interviews or personal writings. Yet the rumor refuses to fade? For some fans, the comforting idea that the magical on-screen couple shared one final, heartfelt moment off-screen softens the harsher reality, ignoring the tension, the injury, and the long years of separation. York never publicly addressed the claim, whether out of disinterest, respect for Elizabeth's privacy, or because it simply wasn't true. His silence only allowed the myth to grow unchecked, beneath the romanticized stories. However, lay a far more complicated truth. York's final years were defined by relentless pain, poverty, and illness, stripping away the illusions Hollywood had built around him. By the early 1990s, his world had narrowed to the walls of his small Michigan home. The once towering figure had grown frail, worn down by decades of pain and the toll of prescription medication. The back injury that had ended his career never healed, and in fact worsened, leaving him bedridden for long stretches. Even sitting upright for more than a few minutes became exhausting. Despite the decline, York found purpose. He launched a charity effort called Acting for Life, using his voice and phone calls to help the homeless and raise awareness for marginalized communities. From his bed, he made hundreds of calls to politicians, organizations, and potential donors, a quiet defiance against the physical limitations imposed on him. Physically, though, his decline was relentless. He battled severe emphysema from years of smoking, gasping for breath after just a few sentences. Hospital stays became frequent, and friends noticed he rarely spoke of Hollywood anymore. Whatever unresolved feelings lingered about Bewitched or Elizabeth Montgomery seemed locked away, replaced by the daily reality of surviving one more day. When he passed on February 20th, 1992, at the age of 63, tributes poured in from fans remembering the quick-witted, charming Darren Stevens. Elizabeth issued a brief public statement expressing her sadness and acknowledging his contribution to the show. For some, her words reignited rumors of a secret final visit. For others, they felt like a respectful farewell to a chapter of her life she had long since closed. Behind the warm nostalgia, however, the true nature of their relationship with its tensions, silences, and missed possibilities remained untouched. It was as if the curtain had fallen not only on York's life, but on the story that had kept fans guessing for decades. Just 2 years later, an unexpected twist would cast Elizabeth Montgomery's own final chapter in a new, haunting light. In her last years, she began reflecting more openly on her career and the people who had shaped it, revisiting memories that had long been kept. Private and revealing perspectives that added depth and a hint of melancholy too. The story she had shared with York, interviews from the mid-1990s, revealed a softer, more candid side of Elizabeth Montgomery, one far less guarded than during her prime. She rarely spoke directly about Dick York, yet those close to her claimed that, in private moments, she acknowledged the complicated truth of their time together. According to one friend, Elizabeth admitted she had been aware of York's feelings all along. She wasn't angry. If anything, she found them both flattering and tragic. Flattering because their on-screen chemistry had a kernel of truth. Tragic because it created an invisible wall neither dared to cross. She reportedly confided that she wished circumstances had been different, his health stronger, his burdens lighter, so they might have enjoyed a deeper friendship without tension hanging between them. There were hints of regret for not reaching out in his final years. In one conversation, she is said to have quietly remarked, "I should have called." Whether this related to the persistent rumors of a secret visit remains unknown, but the comment added a bittersweet edge to the public narrative. By 1995, Elizabeth faced a battle she could not win. Diagnosed with colon cancer in March, she kept her illness private until it was too late for treatment. As her health declined, she gave only a few final interviews, each tinged with a sense of closure. Her reflections on Bewitched and its cast carried new weight, as if she were leaving behind carefully chosen words for those still wondering about the past. When she passed on May 18, 1995, at just 62, fans were left with two intertwined legacies: the magical illusion of Samantha and Darren, and the unresolved, very human story of the actors behind them. In that space between fantasy and reality, the truth about Dick York and her truth remained just out of reach. There is, however, one last detail rarely discussed that may be the closest we'll ever get to an answer. In the weeks after her passing, those closest to Elizabeth began sharing fragments of her words and small, telling remarks. One friend recalled a quiet afternoon not long before her death when Bewitched came up. Elizabeth smiled faintly and said, "You know, some things are better left between two people." She offered no further explanation, but the words lingered. Another confidant revealed that she kept a small box of mementos from her years on the show scripts with handwritten notes, candid set photos, and even a single black and white still of her and Dick York in a moment between takes. It wasn't framed or displayed, just tucked away. Whether this was simple nostalgia or something deeper, no one could say. If she had intended to speak in detail about York, about his feelings, their working relationship, or the rumors that shadowed them, she never got the chance. Her illness moved too quickly, leaving no room for memoirs or tell-all interviews. What remained was a patchwork of half-hints and subtle admissions, a final, fragile thread connecting to lives forever intertwined by both magic and unspoken truths. Exactly. Their story thrives in that space between what we see on screen and what we never fully know off it. Samantha and Darren remain frozen in Taman, emblem of charm, humor, and domestic magic, but behind that polished facade lay unspoken emotions, sacrifices, and struggles that no audience ever truly witnessed. Dick York's pain, his devotion, and the abrupt end to his career contrast sharply with Elizabeth Montgomery's graceful, yet private handling of the years that followed. The hints, half-admissions, and quiet regrets she shared only deepened the sense of mystery. Whether she ever reached out, whether there was an unspoken farewell, or whether she carried the memory silently to her grave, we may never know. That uncertainty is precisely what keeps the legend alive in a way. The magic of Bewitched extends beyond its spells and charms. The real enchantment is in the untold story, the tension between fantasy and reality, and the private lives that intersected in ways we can only guess at. Their silence, intentional or not, transforms their legacy into a story that belongs as much to the imagination as to history, an enduring spell that continues to captivate, leaving us to wonder, reflect, and marvel at what was hidden just out of sight. It's a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we never fully uncover.